Our opening hymn today is Words That We Hold Tight, which is number 179 in your gray hymnal. The words will be on the screen if you'd like to sing or hum along. Good morning and welcome to this place of community and fellowship, where we know that the energy of each of us is heightened and magnified when added to the energy of the other. The whole is absolutely greater than the sum of its parts. I'm Dave Lloyd, and our worship associate today is Paula Sejut-Dvorak. Our regular Sunday services are conducted by our minister, Paula Romancic. Our music today is provided by Jamie Passman. We light our chalice, the symbol of our church and denomination, with these words: in the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. There's always a lot going on around the church, and you can read all about it in News and Notes, which arrives in your inbox every Friday. If you'd like to receive news and notes, you can go to the church's website, www.hinsdaleunitarian.org, and click on the Connect button at the top of the homepage. I have two announcements of an environmental nature today. Your Green Sanctuary Committee has teamed up with two other churches in Hinsdale to schedule a major recycling day on Saturday, April 9th, at Redeemer Lutheran in Hinsdale. This includes all kinds of hard-to-recycle items like medical equipment, bikes, propane tanks, paint, aerosol cans, and shredding trucks for your tax returns, bank records, canceled checks, those sorts of things. Mark your calendar for April 9th and watch this site for more information. And we're planning a wildflower walk at Bemis Woods Forest Preserve on Saturday, April 30th. When the spring beauties, trout lilies, and May apples are at their best. Again, mark your calendar and watch for details. Our opening hymn is Words That We Hold Tight, which is number 179 in our gray hymnal. The words will be on the screen if you'd like to sing or hum along.
Forgiveness, make love our end. Show us, oh show us that
And now our religious education director, Pam Fodor, has a story for all ages.
One of the ways you use gather inspiration and wisdom is by listening to stories of important people throughout history. You might say they are our heroes and heroines because they believed in something important and worked to make the world a better place. Like last week's story, our brave heroine, Julia Butterfly Hill, loved a redwood forest and did something extraordinary to save it. When Julia was 23 years old, she was on a spiritual journey. She was looking for and trying to find the mystery that some people call God. Julia spent most of her journey in the ancient redwood forest. The first time she entered the redwood groves, she fell to her knees and cried tears of happiness because she felt so close to the mystery there. She loved the redwood trees very much, in particular, one very large tree that she named Luna. When Julia learned that the Pacific Lumber Company bought the land that Luna and her tree family stood on, she knew she had to do something. This spiritual place that was home to 1,000-year-old trees could not be cut down to make paper and building supplies. So, Julia climbed Luna's branches and refused to come down. She lived on a small platform made of scrap wood covered with tarps. Julia lived up in Luna's branches for 2 years, using a cell phone to talk to reporters to gather support from other people. Finally, with a lot of pressure from more and more supporters, the lumber company agreed to not cut down any trees for 3 acres around Julia and Luna. Julia Butterfly Hill stood up for what she believed in to save a lot of the ancient redwood forest. She was truly a brave heroine, making the world a better place.
Thanks, Pam. Let us now take a few moments to settle into our chairs. Put your feet flat on the ground. Imagine that you are in your favorite natural setting, on the beach on a warm day, in a forest, on a mountaintop. Concentrate and conjure the image of a big bag of sand, the kind they sell at hardware stores and garden stores, the kind that you use for sandboxes, for a base for paving stones, for mixing up a batch of potting soil. Got that image? Big bag of sand. Now imagine that you are holding that bag of sand on your shoulders. As you sit at your computer or on your couch or kitchen chair holding a device, imagining yourself in a beautiful surroundings, that bag of sand is on your shoulders. As you go out to the kitchen for a drink or a snack, you have to balance that bag of sand. When you go out and come back, you have to rearrange that bag of sand on your shoulders. Now Jamie will play Crystal Silence by Chick Corea. It's a beautiful story, a beautiful song for a cold, crisp day like today.
Our first reading is from Vivian Pomeroy. Mr. Pomeroy, that's right, that was when people named boys Vivian, was a congregational minister who was born in Yorkshire, England, and moved to America, where he was a Unitarian minister in Massachusetts and an author of children's books. Forgive us that often we forgive ourselves so easily and others so hardly. Forgive us that we expect perfection from those to whom we show none. Forgive us for repelling people by the way we set a good example. Forgive us the folly of trying to improve a friend. Forbid that we should use our little idea of goodness as a spear to wound those who are different. Forbid that we shall feel superior to others when we are only more shielded. And may we encourage the secret struggle of every person. We enter this space bringing with us joys, concerns, challenges, and blessings. When we are together in person, we invite each other to light candles to remember our intentions. I'll light a candle now to celebrate the coming spring. And if you have any celebrations or concerns, feel free to post them in the chat section. And we have a special guest today.
Everybody, I am back with a brand spanking new liver, and I just wanted to say I have really, really appreciated all the support and love that I have gotten from my church community. You guys are truly, truly the best, and thank you very much. It is hard for me to add this one bit, but I just found it out this morning. My ex-wife Janice's dog Blossom had to get put down last night. She was very sick. Delia came in from school. She and Janice sat on the couch and cuddled with her, from what I've been told. And then she got put to sleep this morning. So that is the one dark side of the whole thing. But the good thing is I am back and better than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. We're so glad to have you back with us, and wish you nothing but the best going forward. Our second reading is from Robert Eller Isaacs, a retired UU minister who currently lives in Minnesota. This is a responsorial litany, so feel free to join in at home. I'll read the response quietly each time so you can say it along with me. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For each time that greed has blinded us to the needs of others, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For the selfishness which sets us apart and alone, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For losing sight of our unity, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. for those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
I used to drive a lot for my job. Back in the old days, I used to go to court downtown 3 or 4 days a week, and often to court in another county on Fridays. Now, when I talk about going to court, most court is not like you see on TV. There isn't typically a big trial with the families of the two sides gasping and crying and lawyers pounding on the podium. In the vast majority of courts, everything is very routine. The judge might hear dozens or even hundreds of motions in a morning, all similar and all taken care of in a few minutes. In fact, the first time I ever took my son to court, I was representing a bankruptcy trustee at the time, and the trustee gets a copy of most motions that get filed. And sometimes the judge wants to hear what the trustee has to say, what the trustee's position is, and does the trustee object to the motion, agree? And I would have to step up and say, our position is this, the trustee has no objection, whatever. So when my son and I were in court, I was looking through the list of cases, and I saw that the last one was coming up. So I said to my son, okay, I'm going to step up and say, good morning, Your Honor, David Lloyd on behalf of the trustee, we have no objection. So the case gets called, and I step up and I say, good morning, Your Honor, David Lloyd on behalf of the trustee, we have no objection. And I go and sit down. And my son says, this is what you do? They pay you for this? And then for months thereafter, if I ever came home and said, boy, I had a tough time at work today, he would say, oh, you had to say no objection 3 times? Yeah. Okay, so where was I? Let's see. Court, motion. Oh, okay. So I was driving to court a lot back in the old days. And you get tired of the radio, and the car doesn't have a CD player. You remember CD players? You remember cassette players? So I would subscribe to a number of podcasts. And one of the podcasts I subscribe to is called the British History Podcast. It's all about Middle Eastern cuisine. No, it's not. It's about British history. Right now I'm on episode 387. And I'm just about out of the Anglo-Saxon period, just at the brink of the Norman invasion. And the host has spent about 300 episodes on Anglo-Saxon history, which, if you've had a course in European history, is usually covered in a few days or a week. And the host acknowledges that some people have written to him and asked him why he has spent so much time on Anglo-Saxon history. You know, let's get moving. And he responds that the Anglo-Saxons ran England for 600 years. You know, what if you covered all of U.S. history from Columbus to the present day in a week? So I've learned a lot about Anglo-Saxon history in those 300 episodes, and about the people and the culture just driving around in my car. One thing, we think of Anglo-Saxons as living in huts and wearing animal skins for clothing, but that's not it at all. The Anglo-Saxons had a full and well-developed culture with music and literature and fine jewelry. There's a collection of jewelry called the Staffordshire Hoard that Suzanne and I got to see in a museum in Birmingham, England, which is an example of some of the excellent jewelry work that was possible in the Anglo-Saxon period. Apparently, some high-status family hid some of their best jewelry in a pit underground. Maybe there was an invasion, maybe there was some sort of raid, meaning to come back for it later, and they never did. So in 2009, a guy with a metal detector found the Staffordshire Hoard. There were something like 4,600 objects and fragments buried together. And here are some of the pieces. This is not a culture where people were living in huts. This is some beautiful inlaid, look at the precision of the gold work. These are garnets and other semi-precious stones. You know, the work that goes into this, a modern jeweler would be proud to do some of this stuff. This is a piece that comes off of a sword. So they were decorating weapons and tools with this level of jewelry. And for a sense of how much there was, this is it laid out in a museum. Around the time that the Staffordshire hoard was being buried, this is a lot of Anglo-Saxon trivia, but we do get to a point, please believe me. Anglo-Saxon England was divided into 7 kingdoms. The kingdom in the middle of the country where Staffordshire is located and where the Staffordshire hoard was found was called Mercia. The king of Mercia was a guy named Offa. That's a picture of him, that's a statue of him. There's no truth to the rumor that Offa's last name was My Cloud. Mercia bordered Wales, and to defend the border, he built a wall or a dike that ran hundreds of miles. The way he built it was to have his soldiers and workers dig a long, continuous ditch along the border and pile up the dirt on the Mercia side, so that if the Welsh wanted to come over on a raid, they would have to run down into the ditch and then climb up the ridge, all the while English archers are shooting down at them. And there's no truth to the rumor that Offa said that Wales would pay for the wall. Most of Offa's dike is still there, and you can hike a trail that goes along it called the Offa's Dyke Trail. There are places where it's all grown up with trees and shrubs and things, but it looks like this in a lot of places, and it forms the boundary between people's lands and territories. After Offa's time, the Vikings invaded England. They knocked off the 7 kingdoms, one after the other, until only Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, stood up against them. Wessex was south of Mercia, along the southern coast of England. Even Alfred the Great lost a big battle, and he had to go into hiding on a hill in a marshy part of the country, where he called together all the nobles who hadn't already surrendered. And he built up an army, he built up his strength, and conducted guerrilla warfare against the Vikings, finally building up a large enough army that he could challenge the Vikings to an open battle. He won a number of battles, and then he made a deal with the Vikings where they would divide the country in half. There was a line that went from the southeast, London and Kent, all the way to the northwest. Everything south and west of there would belong to the Anglo-Saxons. Everything north and east would belong to the Vikings. It was called the Danelaw. When Alfred the Great died, his son Edward became king of Wessex, and his daughter Ethelflad married the leader of Mercia. Because Alfred the Great had reconquered Mercia, the guy next in line to the throne of Mercia agreed not to call himself king of Mercia, but lord of Mercia, acknowledging in some way that Alfred the Great was sort of like the tip-top king. Between the lord of Mercia and Alfred's son Edward, they started a campaign to drive back the Vikings. When the lord of Mercia died, Ethelflad took over as lady of Mercia, and she and her brother succeeded in driving the Danes out of England and united all of England in one country for the first time ever. Ethelflad is one of my favorite characters in English history, and here's a picture we took of her statue in a city called Tamworth. If you can see it, she's holding a sword in one hand and protecting a young boy with the other. The young boy is her nephew Ethelstan, the son of her brother Edward. Ethelstan went on to become the first king of all England. Flash forward 100 years. England is one country, one kingdom, and the old kingdoms, Mercia, Wessex, Northumberland, are now earldoms under the one king of England. The Earl of Mercia is a guy you've never heard of, named Leofwich, but you've heard of his wife. Her name was Godgifu, which is sometimes spelled Godiva. Lady Godiva wanted her husband to reduce the taxes on the city of Coventry. He said no, and yet she persisted. So he finally said, okay, fine, I'll reduce the taxes if you ride naked through the city of Coventry. And she called him on it and said, okay, I will. So they issued an order that everyone in the city had to shut up their doors and windows on the day of her ride. And everybody did, except one guy, a tailor named Tom, And that is where the term Peeping Tom comes from. That's absolutely a true story. Whether that ride happened is a legend, but from the legend springs the name Peeping Tom. At the time that Lady Godiva was making her ride, the king of all England was named Edward the Confessor. He was called the Confessor because after his death, people decided that he was really pious, so they named him the Confessor. The Earl of Wessex was a guy named Godwin. He got the king really mad at him by attacking the city of Dover. You know, who would expect? Godwin believed that he had a good reason or excuse for attacking the city, and it was all a mistake, and he pleaded for the king to give him a chance to explain himself and ask for forgiveness. But the king didn't agree, and he banished Godwin and all his sons. This is despite the fact that the king was married to Godwin's own daughter, who must not have been real happy about this. So Godwin raised an army and invaded and ravaged the king's lands. He raised a bunch of ships and committed piracy on the king's trade until the king was in serious trouble and finally agreed to invite Godwin to a party where all the other nobles were there, and Godwin got to tell his side, and the king had to publicly forgive him. All this Anglo-Saxon trivia is to lead up to the story of King Edward and Earl Godwin and how important getting the king's forgiveness was for the Earl. So important that he raised an army and built ships to fight the king until the king would give in and forgive him. It's an example of the real power of forgiveness. And that's the title of our service today, The Power of Forgiveness. Almost 30 years ago, I had a falling out with my brother. Of course, because I'm telling the story, it was all his fault. But for years, I never went to his house. He wasn't invited to my house. We would see each other at family gatherings and be cordial, but we never spoke outside of that. It really bothered my mother to see her sons broken apart like that. And she would ask over and over again, can't you guys to get together? And my answer would typically be, well, it's up to him. Finally, about 10 years ago, I wrote him a letter on paper in the mail and said, I won't use the word forgive because that's arrogant, but I understand, and I'd like to get together. He called, we had lunch, and he made the closest thing to an apology that he could. And I explained that I understood what was going on, and we parted friends. I told my mother, and she was so happy that we had made up. Now, we still have nothing in common. I never see him or talk to him, but not because I'm carrying around a bunch of anger or resentment, just he's somebody that I don't have much in common with. It was very important for me to forgive him within myself so that I could drop that burden and go on with my life. Oh, and by the way, remember way back before the Anglo-Saxon period when I asked you during the meditation to imagine sitting in your favorite place, but you had that big old sand on your shoulders? Now imagine dropping that bag of sand. Doesn't that feel good to get that weight off your shoulders? Don't take my word about forgiveness. The Harvard Medical School has this to say about forgiveness. Practicing forgiveness can have powerful health benefits. Observational studies and even some randomized trials suggest that forgiveness is associated with lower levels of depression, anxiety, and hostility, reduced substance abuse, higher self-esteem, and greater life satisfaction. Dr. Tyler Vanderweel at the Harvard University School for Public Health wrote this: forgiving a person who has wronged you is never easy, but dwelling on those events and reliving them over and over can fill your mind with negative thoughts and suppressed anger. Yet, when you learn to forgive, you are no longer trapped by the past actions of others and can finally feel free. The Harvard Medical School also says that there are two sides to forgiveness. decisional forgiveness and emotional forgiveness. Decisional forgiveness involves a conscious choice to replace ill will with goodwill. You no longer wish bad things to happen to that individual, says Dr. Van der Weel. This is often quicker and easier to accomplish than emotional forgiveness. In my job, I have to deal with a government agency. People who work for the government get in the habit of being right, in the habit of being the good guys. And it's easy to become overly sure of yourself. I know, I used to work for a government agency myself. At this one agency, there's one particular lawyer there who really bugged me because of his arrogance, his dismissiveness, his hostility, his superiority. He made my life difficult, and I couldn't stand just seeing his name on an incoming email. But I thought really hard about it. And I finally considered how his job is probably a hellhole. He's probably frightened and miserable all the time. And knowing that, I was able to forgive him. He's just acting out. He's just kicking the dog when you come home. I could finally move away from the feeling that he was evil or seeking to do harm to me and just realize that he was probably scared or sad. I could sympathize with him, and that led me to be able to forgive him. Here's the Harvard Medical School again, talking about emotional forgiveness. You move away from those negative feelings and no longer dwell on the wrongdoing. Dr. Van der Weel says, emotional forgiveness is much harder and takes longer, as it's common for those feelings to return on a regular basis. But when you can turn those negative feelings of anger and resentment into compassion and sympathy, you can forgive. You can restore yourself to a happy state. You can drop that heavy bag of sand that you've been carrying. They say forgive and forget, but you don't have to forget. That person did something wrong. But you can forgive by understanding that they were flawed or hurt or scared, and that's what led them to do what they did. When I was the age when everyone at work was getting married, we would have lunch with a happy person, and everyone would give one piece of advice. What I often said was, whatever the other person does that drives you crazy, they're not doing it on purpose. They're not doing it to spite you. Something in their genes, something in their growing up, something in lessons they learned is compelling them to do this thing that might not bother anybody else in the world except it hits a chime for you. And you know, that's true of just about everyone. If they do something that bothers or angers you, it's almost never personal. They're just acting out. If you can understand where they're coming from, or even just figure there's something that you don't know and can't figure out, but there must be something there, something that is driving them to act a certain way. It's easier to have sympathy. It's easier to show mercy. It's easier to show compassion. It's easier to forgive them. And forgiveness is just as important when you're forgiving yourself. I hosted a service a few years ago in which I said, regret is bogus. And that's a big part of forgiving yourself. It's easy to regret choices that you've made if things didn't work out the way you wanted. But you most likely made the best choice you could with the information at hand. And even if you really made a mistake and just acted against your interests, really screwed up, chances are you learned valuable lessons that have served you ever since. And of course, you can't predict what would have happened if you had done something different. People say, oh, if I had only gone to see that person, if I had only taken that job. But if you had taken that job on the first day, you could have been running to work so you get there on time and hit by a bus. If you had gone to see that one person, you might not have met the other person who made such a difference in your life. The smallest changes can have the largest consequences. So if you're carrying around that bag of sand regarding yourself. Oh, I wish I had. Oh, I shouldn't have. You can let that go because you can have compassion on yourself, that old version of yourself, just as with another person. If you understand the you that you were, you can forgive that you. You can forgive yourself. And when forgiving others, it's also possible and important to forgive yourself at the same time. When you've been carrying around a grievance for a long time, of course it becomes harder to forgive the other person the longer you carried it around. And then at some point, you begin to blame yourself for continuing to feel anger and resentment. Why can't I get past this? Why can't I forget about it? Why can't I forgive? So now you're carrying around two bags of sand, one for them and one for you. So you have to forgive yourself for being stubborn and resistant for all that time. But don't worry, if you can summon up compassion for someone else, you can summon up compassion for yourself. Of course, you were right to react the way you did. You were truly injured. It's natural to be angry and resentful. We know that forgiveness is difficult, so don't blame yourself for taking a long time to forgive. You've done it now, so celebrate yourself. You're a smart and forgiving and merciful person. I hope we can all see the power of forgiveness, of showing mercy to another person, and showing mercy and forgiveness to ourselves. When we get in the habit of understanding and forgiving, then even trivial events, that guy that cuts you off in traffic, that person who is clueless and selfish in a store, that just drops off your shoulders like rain. You get in the habit of, oh, that person must be in a hurry. They're not thinking. If you get in the habit of showing forgiveness and mercy, you become like those historical figures, Offa and Ethelflad and Leofwich and Lady Godiva. You'll be a good Mercian just like them. And please forgive me for the Anglo-Saxon pun. This is the time in the service where we invite each other to share our resources to continue the work of this church. At any time, you can easily make a contribution by visiting the church website, www.hinsdaleunitarian.org, and clicking on the donate button. Why not put a sticky note on your monitor right now to remind you to make a contribution as soon as this service is over? Let's say these words together. This church is made up of all of us. It is what we learn together, the work we do together, the fun we have together. It is what we share with one another, with people around us, and with all the world. Thank you in advance for your generosity. Thank you for your generosity in body and spirit. Our final hymn today is Lo, the Earth Awakes Again. We just celebrated Imbolc, the beginning of February, the beginning of spring in the traditional calendar. It doesn't look much like spring today, but we know that the warming and the greening and the growing are just around the corner. The words are on the screen if you like to sing or hum along. Thank you, Jamie. Please join in these words to extinguish the chalice in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of its truth, the warmth of this community, nor the fire of our commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with all the world. One of the sources of Unitarian Universalist thought is the Bible, the repository of Jewish and Christian teachings and wisdom. I don't often quote from the Bible, but today I will because it's so appropriate. From the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, verse 37, "Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven." And from Luke 23:34, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And the big one, which many of us can say really fast, Matthew 6, verses 9 through 15. "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who've trespassed against us." Our parting music is the theme from Forrest Gump. The lead character is known for the way he lives by the theme of kindness and forgiveness for everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day and a great week.